talking about reflections from the front line, so I will share with you some real experiences that I've been having over the last 20 years working inside of companies, and specifically also focusing a little bit on my experience at SumUp, which is a company I've been now with for about a year and a half. All of them, of course, reflections on the future of talent. Because I'll be talking a little bit about SumUp, in case you don't know the company. It is a startup that's trying to grow up. We are a card processing company. We're global. We have a footprint in over 40 countries with a very strong presence in Europe and in Brazil. We have a mission that is very deep in how we're working, which is that we want to help small merchants be successful doing what they love. We also have a vision. Our CEO is really passionate about becoming an organization of loosely coupled autonomous teams that innovate in parallel. And then I lead global design. With design, we talk about product design, branding, and user research. And it is really my responsibility to articulate the vision of what these experiences are going to be for our small merchants. But I lead then through really coordinating with very distributed teams. The last 2 points I think are really quite important. I just want to highlight our CEO's vision of these loosely coupled teams, which is super aspirational, is my so-called worst nightmare, in the sense that I have to coordinate sometimes 40 teams to come together into an experience that makes sense to our merchant. I want to share an anecdote from a conversation last Friday. We had launched an update to our product. It has a new home screen. It actually shifts the product significantly. And we were sitting together celebrating the launch. We were sharing anecdotes and stories about our careers. And this very super talented front-end developer took a moment during a pause and asked, "Can you really study design?" And at first I thought, he must be joking, because of course, yes, you can study design. But really, it was a very genuine question, because he had never studied. He even said himself, he doesn't really know much about studies. He'd really arrived at being a really top talent through curiosity, passion, learning, finding people at Twitter who pointed him to certain directions. And he'd been doing this for 10 years. And so he is really one of our lead engineers to be able to pull off something that in our company is actually really quite complex. And to really bring together a group of people to very collaboratively work through getting to this new launch. So I share this story because, again, together with this vision of becoming organizations that are really flat and non-hierarchical, we also have this trend that the education that we may have had is very different from what we might need in today's world. And as I was reflecting on the future of talent, I was thinking about these 3 topics that I have really strong perspectives on. So hard skills, I'm finding it really quite interesting that at least universities that are preparing the students or the new talent that's coming into the workplace is really not prepared to actually be super effective in the workplace. Product management, I'll be really frank with you, it still doesn't seem to have found its way. I've been doing this for 20 years and I still haven't met a really great product manager. I will also say design. People are coming in with really good use of tools and they know how to solve really complex, ambiguous problems, but they really don't have the skills to know how to take these big, ambiguous problems and really turn them into reality. So I think there's a real delta, a real gap that I think is worth for us to talk about, and I think some of the presentations today will talk about this a bit and give us more thinking. But maybe the other piece that I think is even more important are soft skills. We need to be solving ambiguous problems. There's a lot of uncertainty in what we are sometimes thinking about and needing to solve. We need to collaborate. It's absolutely essential. We need to learn how to facilitate. We need to really figure out how to come together and leave our egos at the door. And that's absolutely not a skill that we are teaching at the university. And then I mentioned that our company wants to become a flat organization. There's a real shift in mindset that's required because you have to really move away from what you might be used to in terms of having control of being the product manager that really tells everybody what to do, to be actually somebody who has to lead amongst peers. And I would say there's a couple of additional trends that I think are amplifying this. I think hard skills in particular. I am one of the people of the older persuasion, and I will tell you, it is really quite hard to stay relevant. I know there is ageism in the industry. I've been confronted with it. So the continuous learning that we're talking about is really quite real, and it is really quite challenging. And really the piece to think about as somebody of the older persuasion is how do we really enable that, and how do we really create the sense that there's value that can be created by bringing together people with younger experiences as well as people with a little bit more experience. Related to being of the older persuasion is really about diversity. And so one of the topics that we are tackling at SumUp is very much around diversity and inclusion, especially at the executive and leadership level. It's something that's really easy to talk about, although when we really try to implement it, it does really reveal the unconscious biases that we have, right? And how do we really address them? Netflix has a wonderful podcast out that talked about the incredible impact having diverse teams had on their product, because as we're global companies, we can't anticipate all the nuances of the countries that we are actually serving. And having people with these diverse experiences part of our teams really makes a difference. But that sounds really easy. It's actually much harder, because now you have to deal with social differences, you have to deal with different forms of communication. It really introduces much more complexity. And then the last piece on the mindset, this is a book I referenced yesterday, Brave New Work. It does really have a bit of a directory of like, here's the operating system, here's how you get there. I will tell you it's a lot messier. And a lot of that mess comes from the fact that we have actually a mindset that we grew up with that we have to shift. It's really fundamental. So I would say, while we can say to compete in the world that we're working in, hard skills are absolutely a requirement. You need to have them. And the soft skills are becoming essential that we have them. I think the big piece is really the theme of a shift in power. This is something that I think is so significant because it speaks to our cultural values and that are deeply embedded. I think most of us grew up and started our career with the idea of moving up in the hierarchy and building teams and making more money, and that's really part of this shift, is really having that go away. 10 years ago, when I came to Telefónica Ima's Day, it was a really big deal for directors to give up their corner office, and that was the change, the beginning of the change. But I would say this is still really very much true today, and it's really quite pervasive. And it's in some ways the challenge I want to pose for us today as we're dealing with all these topics, like how do we really overcome that? I took, in this context of a shift in power in these flat organizations, there's this concept called lateral leadership. This is not exactly a brilliant book, but it is a really lovely, simple book to read that really talks about this idea of leading. How do we lead amongst peers? How do we build alignment? How do we build empathy? How do we really bring that together? And what does it actually really need as a leader to be able to do that? Just before joining SumUp, I had joined a company called Delivery Hero. We are in the food ordering business, quite a big footprint as well. I was told during the hiring that I was going to be leading a group of designers, that we were going to be centralizing that group. And lo and behold, when I got there, of course, that had all changed. And I was, had a small team, but I needed to figure out how to work with that. And I took it as an opportunity to say, okay, how do I actually do this? If we all keep talking about these flat organizations, I need to figure out, how to actually lead through lateral leadership. And I would say I got quite far, and a couple of the values that I found really important as you lead through influence is that I needed to have a vision of where we wanted to go. I needed to really lead with passion and commitment. But also what I found is super important is the level of integrity about my commitments, in particular because the company itself is hugely political. And so to be able to be somebody that people can trust, that they can go to, and that they can really listen to and get help and advice became really one of the things that enabled me to be quite impactful in the company. So maybe to close this MVP that we launched last week, it really, I had to apply that. I had to really work with across a really complex organization. I always joke that SumUp is the smallest organization I've ever worked with, and yet the most complex. Because we had to coordinate between at least 8 teams working across multiple tribes and still also produce our own work. And let me tell you, most of them really didn't care what we were doing, except everything that they were doing was now going to get exposed through this new home screen that we offered. So it is something really quite important to keep practicing, and it's certainly something that we do not teach. And I would say this is the part of the significant shift that I would like for us to grapple with over the next couple of days. I will say I don't have an answer. I'm swimming in the sea of trying to figure out how to make this change happen. But I would like to maybe pose this question of, like, how do we really shift our, especially cultural and social values, to be able to support these corporate changes and what educational models do we really need, so we can move from being teams that are focused on satisfying the directives of a few, right, this very top-down approach, to actually being teams that focus on outcomes, that really bring together very strong individuals, right, who can really make some contribution, but who also leave their ego at the door, and who understand that their true power and impact comes from the understanding they're mighty together, the understanding they can actually, when they work together, they're bigger than themselves. So I know there's great conversations that are coming that will speak to some of the details of what I've highlighted, but I hope I can set the stage and challenge us to really think about this underlying deep cultural shift, which is the shift in power. So that's it.
Lovely.